explain. They show my mouth tight, still got words to say. Running through the night, ain't nothing to explain. Can't mute my pain, but I got something to say. I got something to say, nothing to explain.
Welcome to the Daily Allegory through Astrological Divination. Today's video, we'll start with an affirmation. Try to bury me in silence, your lies will confess, your patterns will testify, and your cage will lock from the inside. Unable to reach him in person, a desperate inner circle pivots to a final silencing tactic, incarceration. Framing him for a murder they themselves committed to divert attention and bury what he knows. They covertly enlist his garbage company to slip a murder kit package into his trash, planting evidence meant to make the arrest feel almost inevitable. But they don't realize the plot is already compromised. Wiretaps, anonymous tips, and defectors inside of their own ranks, people bargaining for less time, have put authorities one step ahead of them from the start. As the net tightens, the target they tried to bury proves far harder to manipulate. Telepathic and razor-skilled at elicitation, he steers incidental conversations, even under the constraints of a no-contact order, to provoke the precise responses needed to expose contradictions and resurrect his previously dismissed statement, totally dismissed and ignored by authorities, taken as incoherent, delusional, and paranoid, and stitch together a preponderance of evidence through pattern behavior analysis. What was meant to be a clean setup becomes a self-incriminating mosaic, revealing the real motive. They weren't framing him out of randomness. They were trying to silence him before their wider catalog of crimes pulled them all under. Today's story is called The Entangled Alibi. By the time the first rumor reached him, it already had fingerprints. Not literal ones, those came later, but the kind that showed up in language. Repeated phrases, identical outrage, the same moral certainty copy-pasted across different mouths. He could feel the pattern like static at the edge of a thought. A group acting as one organism, desperate to make a single man disappear without ever laying a hand on him. They couldn't get to him in person, though. They tried. A few times, actually. And something in the way he stayed calm. Too calm. Like a locked door that didn't even rattle. Made them change their tactics a little bit. No confrontations, no parking lot accidents, no late night knocks. They would do it cleaner, or so they thought. They would build a cage out of procedures. A protective order sat between them like an electrified glass. No contact, no messages, no accidental crossing of paths. It was supposed to isolate him, strip him of witnesses, prevent him from defending himself in the only arena that mattered, the social one. A no-contact order is a quiet kind of violence, though. The legal version of duct tape. It seals your mouth while everyone else talks. But the man had built his whole life around noticing what other people missed. He worked in psychological analysis and profiling the way some people work in prayer. Daily, devoutly, without theatrics. Years of studying how groups distort reality, how fear recruits logic, how criminals mistake repetition for safety. He didn't need their faces. He didn't need their names. He could map them merely by their choices. And his strangest advantage wasn't what he knew. It was what he could hear. Not with ears, with the inner sense he never really spoke aloud about. Because saying it out loud turned him itself into a target. Thoughts around him had weight and direction like weather. Intent had temperature. Lies had a texture. People didn't just speak, they broadcasted. Most minds were a crowded room. This group was a course, tight, synchronized, and rehearsed. He called it telepathy only in private. In public, he called it pattern sensitivity, hypervigilance, trauma adaptation, words that made experts nod and skeptics relax. The label itself didn't matter. The effect did. And the effect was simple. They couldn't plan against him without, in some way, planning through him, if that makes sense. He didn't panic. That was always their first miscalculation. Mars in Capricorn was how he thought of it. Methodical action, patient aggression, the kind that wears a suit and never really raises its voice. He built timelines, not fantasies. He charted the escalation curve. Smear, isolate, provoke, and frame. The four corners, if you will. When a group can't control you socially, they try to control you legally. When they can't harm you directly, they outsource harm to systems. He also charted their astrological signatures the way some investigators chart gang tattoos. Not because the stars dictated outcomes, but because believers in them revealed their plan structure through the symbolism that they chose. This group did, though. He had seen their private messages once, screenshotted, forwarded, half-deleted, full of coded weather reports and transits. Mars aspects everywhere, as if they were praying to conflict itself, almost. Mars sextiles Saturn in the 7th, discipline conflict through contracts, courts, and partnerships. And then with Mars trine Uranus in the 8th, sensitive degree, we have sudden shock in the realm of secrets, debts, death, and other people's money. With Mars sextile Neptune in the 9th, we have fog in law, ideology, institutions, and a perfect mist to a hidden lie. Mars conjunct Pluto in the 10th was a power struggle in public view and reputation as a battlefield. And with Mars square Chiron, as always, the old wound reopened to force reaction. It's kind of like stabbing someone in the same spot multiple times, provoking them, if you will, on purpose. And only framing their reaction, never the instigation. They were telling on themselves with their own mythology, though, here. The man wrote a single line at the top of his notebook. They want an ending that looks like a consequence. The murder. The victim didn't belong to him. That was the second miscalculation. They assumed he would be emotionally tethered to the narrative that they wrote. They assumed the word murder would hijack his nervous system and shove him into mistakes. They assumed a headline would do what fists couldn't. The body was found in a place that felt like a stage, not too hidden, not too visible either. A construction lot near a high-traffic intersection. Enough for the public to notice, enough for the evidence to be found by somebody who could be coached. The victim's identity landed in the news with a cold thud, someone adjacent to their circle, not central, not irrelevant either. A person whose absence could be explained as tragic, whose death could be used as a lantern to spotlight somebody else, redirection, if you will. And they chose him. Within hours, the group's course began. He did it. He's violent. He's been threatening. We were scared. We tried to warn people. The words moved like a script passed hand to hand, almost like a blueprint that other people followed, like directions, if you will. He watched a wave rise without moving. Inside his mind, the air tasted wrong, though. There was too much certainty too quickly. Genuine grief is always messy, and genuine fear contradicts itself. This was polished. He wrote a second line in his notebook. They're not afraid of what I'll do. They're afraid of what I'll remember. The authorities knew, though. That was not luck. That was a system. A unit in the city had been running on an experimental surveillance grid, unofficially called the QNet, by the people who thought they were funny, and by the people who needed a name for something that didn't make sense. It wasn't magic, not literally, but it behaved like a superstition with a budget. Sensor fusion, predicted pattern models, warrant-bound traps, chain of custody so airtight that it felt like fate. The man didn't know the details at first. He only felt the pressure shift, like walking in a room and realizing someone else arrived before you and already turned the lights on. Anonymous tips had been coming in for months now at this point about the group's laundry list of activities. Fraud that hid behind nonprofit fronts, intimidation performed through proxies, theft dressed as asset protection, evidence tampering, blackmail archives, people disappearing socially before they actually disappeared physically. Someone inside their circle had started bargaining with reality. Someone wanted less time. Someone wanted out. Wiretaps bloomed quietly across their communications like mold, and somewhere in that web, his name became reoccurring node. Not as a suspect, as a threat to their structure. If you want to frame a person, you don't start with the person. You got to consider criminal mentality here. You start with the roots around them. A garbage truck is a moving blind spot, mundane, unremarkable, and omnipresent. Evidence disappears in it every day. The perfect place to plant what you want the world to find. The group didn't need to break into his home. They didn't even need to touch his car. They didn't need to meet him up in person. They only needed to touch what touched him. A worker from his garbage company, someone with access to his schedules, bins, pickup times, kind of became their bridge. A handshake, a promise, a favor, a payment disguised as consulting. The worker didn't have to be evil. People do terrible things for reasons that feel small in their own heads. On the morning they chose, a package appeared among the regular trash. Sealed plastic, unwrapped, wrapped tight, weighed strangely. Inside, gloves, duct tape, and a knife with a cheap handle. A strip of fabric carrying the victim's blood, hair in a bag, and a phone with a shattered screen. What the group thought of, kind of like a murder kit, if you will. Not realizing that the QNet had already flagged their communications. Phrases like pickup, dump, bin, route, moving through tap lines like flares. Not realizing that the garbage worker had already been approached by the authorities days prior. Not realizing that the package itself was a theatrical prop in a show the investigators had been rehearsing in silence. From the group's perspective, the plan was elegant. Absolutely perfect. From the authorities' perspective, it was evidence delivery. Now we enter in the Aquarius stellium. The man didn't celebrate when he sensed the net tightening around them. Aquarius energy becomes detached, observant, clinical, and doesn't gloat. It watches, it tests like a scientist, and it verifies. It plays Chase the Dragon so believably counterintelligence goes absolutely unnoticed. It's inherently invisible in plain view. Moon, Venus, Pluto, Sun, and Aquarius, the group like to say, as if cosmic symbolism made them more than they were. A collective with a singular obsession, love twisted into control, power disguised as principle, and identity fused to reputation. They were trying to win in the 10th house, the public arena. Mars conjunct Pluto in the 10th, though, power struggle, visibility, empire, and downfall. He refused to play with them emotionally, so he played structurally. He revisited a statement he made months ago, a warning that had been dismissed because it sounded paranoid without hard proof, that the group would eventually commit something severe and try to pin it on him, that they were building a narrative to erase him. Now the narrative was here. Now the proof would be harvested from their own mouths. Could you imagine? Elicitation, it was called. A no-contact order is a boundary. He treated it like one. He didn't message them. He didn't call them. He didn't send friend requests to ask questions. He didn't do anything that would violate the letter or spirit of the order. Instead, he did what profilers do when they can't touch the subject directly. He shaped the environment till the subject touched itself. Dirty girl. He made statements publicly through lawyers, through filings, through content, through recorded interviews with investigators, crafted not as accusation, but as a mirror. Clean sentences designed to provoke reflexive correction. People in deceptive network cannot, and psychologically it's impossible, they cannot resist correcting what threatens their internal script. Something to prove, you know? He predicted the response patterns like weather, then he watched the responses arrive, through recorded channels, through tapped lines, through secondhand reporting. He didn't need direct contact, their nervous systems did the talking for them. A subtle mention of the construction lot, for example, triggered an immediate call. How does he know it was near the south entrance? Just a point of reference. A casual reference to a phone with a shattered screen produced a panicked text. We never said the phone was broken. A measured remark about a sealed package caused someone to snarl into a line they didn't know was tapped. We told him it would look like trash. How? The man didn't smile. He simply wrote down the inconsistencies, the involuntary reveals. The knowledge only insiders would have. Preponderance of evidence is not a cinematic confession. It's a mosaic, if you will, the bigger picture. And mosaics are built from small, stubborn pieces. You know, without compliance of confession, the evidence without hard evidence is just hearsay until somebody acknowledges it. Now, the Mars Square Chiron, they pushed harder with this. A false report, a fabricated witness, a police welfare check designed to rattle him, a rumor that he'd threatened someone even while under a no-contact restriction. It hit his old wound, Chiron domain, that place in him that had been hurt before language, before logic. His body tried to return to survival mode. His pulse spiked, his hands went cold. Mars Square Chiron, his conflict against a scar, pain, used as leverage. They wanted him reactive. They wanted him messy. They wanted one outburst to paint the whole story. Instead, he did the opposite. He breathed, he grounded, he documented. And somewhere in the background, a different Mars aspect was walking. Mars sextile Saturn in the 7th. Disciplined action through legal partnership. He leaned in the structure, into process, into the slow, humiliating power of rules, because he had something that they didn't. Patience that wasn't fear. When the planted package surfaced, the group expected a spectacle. Handcuffs, flashing lights, a perp walk, waiting for a phone call, hearing that he was arrested for that thing he said he did that didn't happen. They got something stranger. He was called in for questioning, calmly, procedurally, no storming of doors. And when he arrived, the investigators didn't treat him like a man about to be erased. They treated him like a man standing at the edge of a trap. They wanted him to watch closely. The package sat in an evidence bag. They showed him photographs, timestamps, chain of custody logs. Then the lead investigator slid a second file across the table. Wiretap transcripts, the group's voices, captured in their own confidence, discussing routes and bins and timing, proof that the murder kit was planted, not produced. The man felt it then. The quiet, grim satisfaction of a system that had waited to move until it could move perfectly. But the investigators' eyes weren't triumphant. They were curious. You said months ago that they would try to do this, the investigator murmured. How? How did you know? The man hesitated. He could give the safe answer, profiling, behavioral analysis, pattern prediction. He could give the real answer, I heard them thinking about it before they admitted it to themselves. Static in the air. Instead, he gave something in between, true but incomplete. When a group is desperate, he said, they don't invent new behaviors. And this is key. They intensify old ones. They escalate within their belief systems. Their chart is always the same, regardless of the outcome or intent. It doesn't change. It's applied across the board. The investigator's brow furrowed. Chart? The man didn't explain because a twist wasn't on the table yet. The Pisces stellium. The group began to fracture when the net tightened. Pisces energy, North Node, Saturn, Neptune together can be salvation or drowning. Destiny, structure, and illusion braided into one rope. When it holds, it can pull you through a storm. When it breaks, it wraps around your throat, it snaps your neck. Then you're like the bent neck lady from Hill House. Someone inside them started leaking. Someone started begging for deals. Someone started confessing to partial truths that felt to them almost like survival. Like their life was in jeopardy or something. The authorities offered the usual bargain, less time for more names, and the group's unity, built on secrecy, began to dissolve. That's when the group made their final move, not against him, against the narrative itself. They tried to prove he was manipulating everybody, claiming his calm was performance, his evidence was fabrication. His warnings were threats disguised as insight. They leaned into the public arena, Pluto in the 10th, trying to dominate the story before the courts could dominate them. They told the world he was controlling minds. They thought it would make him sound insane. They didn't realize they were describing the truth in a way that finally made investigators pay attention to a detail that they dismiss as metaphor. Because on one of the wiretaps, the group's leader had said something that didn't fit any rational frame. He put the idea in my head. The man thought he was the hunted. He wasn't. He was the lure. Not willingly, not knowingly, but perfectly. The investigator returned weeks later with a question that felt like a blade wrapped in velvet. You didn't just predict their plan, the investigator said. You literally steered it. Yes. The man went still. He saw it suddenly in layered frames. Past, present, future. Stacked like transparent sheets. The groups set an obsession with garbage routes after a night they'd been flailing for options. The way the leader's phrasing had echoed a thought the man remembered having in a moment of cold focus. If they can't reach me, they'll go through the trash. The twist was what his telepathy had done. Under stress, his mind didn't only receive, it broadcasted. Not like a voice, not like a command either. More like a suggestion that felt like their own clever idea. Editing narratives of reality, mentioned like in the last story, the New Moon Protocol. Mars trine Uranus in the 8th, though, sudden shock in the hidden realm. They thought they were outsmarting him by planting evidence. In reality, they had acted out a thought he had released into the collective field around them like bait, and the authorities, already listening, already watching, had let it happen because it would collapse their entire structure all at once. A framed man makes headlines, a caught conspiracy makes history. The man realized with a chill that fear that wasn't fear, but kind of recognition. That his existence wasn't merely inconvenient to them. It was catalytic. He wasn't dismantling them by fighting. He was dismantling them by being a stable center in a system built on distortion, making their lies orbit him until they tightened to a noose. The investigator slid a final photo across the table. A still frame from the surveillance camera on the garbage route. The garbage worker placing the plant package into his bin. And in the next frame, the garbage worker glancing up, not at the bin, not at the street, at a tiny lens embedded into the street-like housing, as if acknowledging the watchfulness, as if acknowledging they were never alone. When the arrests finally rolled out, they came in waves. Not dramatic, not cinematic, efficient. Contracts seized, shell companies collapsed, blackmail archives recovered, devices imaged, accounts frozen. A dozen people for the group's circle facing charges that weren't just about murder, but about an ecosystem that had made murder feel like a tool. And the murder itself, the evidence didn't only show who committed it, it showed why they did it. To divert attention from everything else, to silence the man before he pulled the thread that would unravel the whole garment. The man stood outside the courthouse on the day the first plea deal was entered. Cameras pointed at him like accusation, like curiosity, like worship. Aquarius' cold spotlight. He did not speak to the public. He let the documents speak. He let the mosaic do its work. Mars conjunct Pluto in the 10th public power meeting its shadow. As the group's leader was led away, they turned their head, eyes burning with the last illusion of control. "You think you won?" they mouthed. The man didn't answer out loud. He didn't need to, because inside the leader's mind, he felt the final collapse. Not rage, not even hatred, but the terrible clarity of someone realizing the plan had never actually belonged to them. They had tried to silence him by incarcerating him. Instead, they had delivered themselves into custody piece by piece, one statement at a time, one piece of evidence at a time. Through their own obsession with controlling an ending, and the man, nameless, untouchable, but watching, understood the darkest truth of his gift. He wasn't the target of the story. He was the instrument that forced it to conclude. And again, referencing yesterday's story with the 10 powers and new rules. Because once he noticed the pattern could no longer pretend it wasn't there. We're going to end this with the invocation of the Entangled Alibi. I call the unseen witnesses, the quiet cameras, the patient wires, the lawful eyes that never blink. I call the ledger a pattern, the mathematics, the motive, and truth that repeats until it is heard. Mars and Capricorn temper my pulse into precision. Let my anger become strategy, my fear become focus, my silence become proof. Mars sextile Saturn in the 7th, bind conflict to contract. Let procedure be my shield, let law be my blade. Mars trine Uranus in the 8th, crack the vaults of secrets, shock the hidden accounts, expose the debts of the guilty. Mars sextile Neptune in the 9th, cut through fog and courts and creeds, separate faith from fraud, belief from coercion. Mars conjunct Pluto in the 10th, drag the empire into daylight, turn reputation into reckoning, make power confess. Mars square Chiron, touch the old wound without bleeding, and turn pain into testimony. With the Aquarius stellium, Moon, Venus, Pluto, Sun, cool my mind into clear sight. Let love protect my truth. Let distance sharpen my discernment. Let the collective wake to what was always there. With the Pisces stellium, North Node, Saturn, Neptune, Dissolve the illusion without losing the structure. Let destiny move through discipline. Let the false story melt and the real story stand. By the principle of entanglement, I bind lie to liar. What they touch returns to them. What they plant bears their print. What they whisper echoes in the record. I will not chase. I will not break the boundary. I will not cross the line they drew to silence me. I will elicit. Let every rehearsed sentence trigger a correction. Let every correction reveal forbidden knowledge. Let their urgency create inconsistency. Let their certainty outrun their facts. Let their mouths build the chain they cannot escape. I summon the preponderance, not one proof, but many small truths aligned. Not one confession, but a mosaic of motive, method, and mistake. Let the garbage route become a trap for the planners. Let the planted kit become a delivery of guilt. Let the watchers already watching be confirmed. Let the anonymous tip become the turning key. Let the defectors' hunger for less time become a candle in the dark. And when they try to bury me in procedure, let procedure bury them back. I stand untouchable, not by distance, but by pattern. I stand unbroken, not by luck, but by clarity. The lie is entangled within its maker. The record is alive. The alibi now collapses. These declarations are now law that underlies law, whispered amongst the hive. And so it is. That's all I have.